Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Veterinary Business Podcast, your ultimate resource for developing a successful veterinary practice and career. I'm Dr. Peter Weinstein, one of the co-hosts of the Veterinary Business Podcast. On this podcast, we bring you insights and expertise from industry-leading doctors, experts, and thought leaders. We cover a wide range of topics, including practice management, marketing strategies, leadership development, HR best practices, and much more. Whether you're a practicing veterinarian, a practice owner, a practice manager, or a student studying to be a veterinarian, this podcast is tailored to help you navigate the unique, really unique challenges and tremendous opportunities in the business of veterinary medicine. Every listener of this podcast is welcome to visit the website at www.veterinarybusinessinstitute.com for additional resources and tools to support your growth. And remember, you can subscribe to this and any podcast at iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, and any of your popular podcast platforms. Enough of the formalities. I hate formalities. Let's just get out of the lane lines here. Today, I'm particularly excited to welcome Steven Eidelman, founder and CEO of Modern Animal, and Dr. Christie Long, head of veterinary medicine at Modern Animal. And we're going to talk about Modern Animal, a unique approach to client and patient service. Oh, and by the way, we will go off the rails on a variety of other things as well throughout the conversation. My relationship with Steven goes back many years. He's not that old, so it's just many years. Even before the first Modern Animal hospital opened, we had a number of coffees, brainstorming and talking about the veterinary profession as it stood in those pre-pandemic years. But before we get too deep into the conversation on Modern Animal, let's do some intros. Dr. Long, can I call you Christie?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay. Christie, you go first. Tell us about yourself.
Oh, I was prepared to sit back and let Steve intro himself first, but I guess I'll get up here. So, yes, Christie Long, Chief Medical Officer at Modern Animal. I have been a small animal veterinarian. Gosh, I think I figured it out last night. 18 years since I graduated from Colorado State University. Veterinary medicine was not my initial career choice. I actually had a career as a software engineer before ever even considering becoming a veterinarian. It was never something that was on my roadmap. I am that atypical veterinarian that did not want to be one from 5 years of age. I took a trip around the world in the year 2000 and decided that it was my true calling, and came back to reality and found out how difficult it actually is to get into veterinary school, and but ended up being able to pursue that dream and practiced small animal medicine in Fort Collins. Actually stayed around there for 7 years, and then was able to be a part of starting up one of the very first veterinary telehealth companies, and really enjoyed doing that, figuring out how to build a virtual business that delivers veterinary advice. We ended up selling that business to Petco, where I worked for a couple of years building a couple of concept stores in San Diego that were centered around providing a membership-based approach to care, grooming, training, retail, the whole thing. It was there that I began to really think about what is the optimal execution of the delivery of veterinary care, both for the practitioner and the person who was attempting to receive it for their pet. And I didn't know exactly what it looked like, but I knew that what I was doing at Petco probably wasn't aligned with that. And I was introduced to Steve by my boss at the time, Brock Weatherup, a serial entrepreneur in the pet space. And I had never talked with anyone who I felt like had the same viewpoint and saw the same issues that I did, and opportunities really more than anything else. So yeah, I was excited to join on, and been here since the beginning with Steve mostly, and here we are today. So
So you decided to take a significant pay cut and become a veterinarian instead of a software engineer, which means you're in it for the passion and not the money. Congratulations, you're like the rest of us.
Okay, maybe that does make me like the rest of us then. I didn't start when I was 5, but you're right. You're right.
Oh, Steve, I think the first time I met you and heard you was at one of the Veterinary Innovation Summits, probably at A&M back in the good old days. And we just kind of talked about different things that you were in a different world back then. So if you would kind of give us an idea of how you've been involved with the veterinary field, because I know you started more on the business side of things than the veterinary side of things. So I'd love to share your history with our listeners.
Yeah, thanks. And yeah, I guess starting on that side, you have to have a really big leap of faith to go to the other side, like Christie did, which I have not yet done. I don't think I'm getting into veterinary school anytime soon. But yeah, I mean, if I go back 12 years, I had a whiteboard with a bunch of ideas on the whiteboard, and pets, which is not really an idea, but a word, was one of the words on the board. And my roommate at the time, Ben Jacobs, and I decided to start a company together, and that word pets was the only one that we could agree on out of all the other words. And I strongly dissuade anyone from starting a company this way, but it is what happened. And we decided to start a company called Whistle. The vision was, my background before that was management consulting, so business consulting, and then venture capital, where I invested in technology companies for a few years. And I just really wanted to be an entrepreneur. My parents had immigrated from Ukraine. My father, my uncle were entrepreneurs their whole lives. It kind of had it in my blood, I guess. But I was on my trajectory of just sort of having the best job I could have and not really knowing what my purpose was. And so we started Whistle. The vision was we knew that pet health, or we thought that pet health would become a very big category with a lot of growth and a lot more investment and focus, and that it was underserved. And so we picked the wedge at the time that felt like a big wave that was taking over, which was wearables. And we wanted to build a pet health monitor. And the journey from 2012 until we were acquired by Mars in 2016 was one of learning a lot about running a business, raising capital, hiring, firing. How do you build a product? How do you realize it's the wrong product? How do you iterate and pivot? We acquired a company, and then we ultimately sold the business. So learned a lot. The vision of pet health was never really fully realized. We ended up finding a lot more traction in GPS tracking. And so before we went too far down the path of building a Garmin, we sold the business right as Mars started to invest much more seriously into the veterinary space. And I think right around the time when we met, when I was speaking at Veterinary Innovation Summit and other conferences, I was pretty convinced that someone had to build a better veterinary care delivery model. I just had no interest in doing it. And so I think that Texas A&M conference, I'll never forget, I was very eager to give the idea for what Modern Animal now is away to anybody who would listen. And I think I did that successfully, unfortunately for us. But a lot of people were taking photos. I'll never forget John Ayers, who I had a lot of respect for, was sitting in the front row, and everything that man would say was incredibly intelligent, and someone who was really passionate about this industry too. And I remember him taking photos, and it was really distracting because I was like, if he's taking photos, I must be saying something right. But at that time, I really had no interest in starting another company in the pet space. I just wanted to share some ideas I had from the years that I'd been in it. And I was ready to go back to the whiteboard. But what happened was I started spending a lot more time in practices and around people in the industry. And it was hard to turn away from the reality, which was I had a pretty clear picture of what I thought the world should look like. And that is how you start a company. It was a very clear vision for a future that looked different from the reality that existed in front of us. And a lot of it centered around how technology could drive change as a wedge into the industry. And a lot of it also centered around the client experience, because as a non-veterinarian, for me, my primary interaction was as a consumer, as a pet owner. But in the few years that I spent after Whistle was acquired, observing, I also saw a lot more problems and quite frankly, more interesting problems and more severe problems that really plagued the profession and the people that worked in it. And that was very motivating because at that point, I'd become quite good friends with a lot of people in the industry. And I started to care pretty deeply about it. And ultimately, I always have to give credit where credit is due. My wife basically said, if you don't start this company, somebody else will, and you will regret it for the rest of your life. And she was right. And I think as soon as she said that, I realized this is what I needed to do. And now it's been 5 years since we incorporated the company, probably about 6 or 7 years since I really started thinking about it. It's been, yeah, the journey of my life, and the one that I'm committed to from here for as long as I get to continue to stay on the path, because I think there's a lot of work to do, and it's been really gratifying, and it's been a lot of fun.
So the take home from all of that is listen to your wife.
Always.
1000%. As a wife, I agree. I approve of this message.
It's interesting. So the only word left on your whiteboard is still pets, huh?
Everything else has been erased. We're good.
So share your vision. You shared it at the Veterinary Innovation Summit. You had people in the room nodding, either because they were falling asleep or they agreed with you. But let's talk about the epiphany. You're a consumer of veterinary services because you're not a veterinarian. You're an honorary veterinarian now because of your commitment. But as a consumer of veterinary services, you must have been dissatisfied with your experience. Something visiting hospitals caused you to be dissatisfied, but it gave you a vision, an epiphany, and a dream that eventually became modern. Can you summarize that vision?
Yeah, and I hesitate to even use the word vision because I don't fancy myself much of a visionary. I think that ultimately I was just experiencing what I thought were more. I was having experiences in other businesses, whether it was doctors or even retail environments or just online businesses, that felt much more up to date, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it. And I didn't understand what was going on that was preventing the veterinary industry from keeping up. And the things that stood out to me that were obvious, that were sort of that first long laundry list of things that felt off or broken or could be better. Why couldn't I book my appointment online? Why couldn't I message with the doctor? I think now in 2024, good luck getting a millennial or a Gen Z pet owner on the phone. I don't know about you guys even. I can't answer the phone anymore because it's 90+% of the time spam call. So, I think the idea of just being able to message with a doctor, I remember getting one of the moments I remember that was this epiphany was I had this veterinarian, I finally got her phone number. And I remember deliberating whether to text her or not at like 11 o'clock at night. And now I was sort of close enough to it where I was thinking about them, not as this service provider in my life as a pet owner, but as a veterinarian who I was spending all day with in the back of the practice, getting to know them, over drinks afterwards or over a meal, hearing about their families and thinking, I can't text her. So I'm on Google, I'm Googling around looking for the answer. And there's a lot of stuff like that. I think just from being more of a technology minded person, looking at things like Cornerstone or Petware or Woofware or DV Max in 2017 and 2018, it just didn't make any sense. And so I started to get really intellectually curious about why are things the way they are. That was really the trigger to go deeper. It was less we should have an app. I'm still not convinced you necessarily need an app. I think it was more just an idea. That was a feature, but the bug in the system I couldn't figure out. Like, why are we stuck? And that's what I kind of had to figure out.
So you had a software engineer who you ran into, who happened to be running a different business model for a pet store corporation, and it almost seems like the match was a match made in heaven from that standpoint. It was. It's like the accident in the street that leads to the marriage. And somehow your second wife, Christie,
Yep.
It sounds like took a lot of your ideas and threw a lot of stuff on the whiteboards, and together you came up with a new business model that you opened right before the pandemic. So Chris, do you want to elaborate a little bit on your role and how the two of you came together to eventually open your first location at a perfect time, right?
Yeah, there was not much else going on. And I want to be clear that there was a real software engineer ahead of me who actually knew how to, write software in this day and age, as I would not be capable of that anymore. Who's Keith Hackbarth, our VP of engineering. All the respect to Petco, they've done amazing things in terms of building out their veterinary business. I think that for me in that situation, I was just reflecting on a lot of the things that hadn't worked for me as a veterinarian. And I think perhaps, having been, for lack of a better term, in corporate America, right, and worked as a software engineer, a lot of the things that just seem to be, how things are done in veterinary medicine, I couldn't understand. I was at work most nights I was at work until 8 o'clock, sometimes later. I missed a lot of my kids' childhood. I was expected to contact clients on my day off with lab results or to check on their pet, I never had a day off. I don't think that I didn't get called, by the practice. And I didn't put up any kind of fight about it. It was just the way things were, but it was super incongruous with what I was used to, right? As a professional in another industry. And then just the culture issues as well. The person who we keep on at the practice, they're so burnt out, they're so toxic, but they know their job and we can't get anybody else to do it, So a lot of the things that were just sort of de rigueur in my life as a software engineer, performance management, respecting people's time off, kind of seemed to be out the window in veterinary medicine. And that was prior to Petco, but then coming to Petco, I think I was really looking for a chance to sort of change a lot of those things, and I didn't get it. And so, Steve already had seen a lot of that when I met him, and we were just both nodding our heads in unison about the things we wanted to tackle. Technology was obviously a big driving force in it, but there was just so much more. And I think as the years have gone on, these past 5 years, I always tell people, because they comment on how lovely our practices are and how well designed they are, that was the easy part. The harder part has been solving some of the people issues. But, getting started in those early days, we built an app. So we had an app ready to go. We had a structure around what our membership model was going to be. We hired some incredible doctors to start the company. The message of practicing quality medicine and a new environment, I think, really resonated with not only some great doctors, but some incredible support staff folks who still work for Modern Animal today. And so we got ready to open. And famously, just to tell the tale, the LA Department of Water and Power showed up right before we were supposed to open and said, "Oh, you're going to need a new transformer at this location." So that postponed our opening to essentially the first week of April 2020, which, as we all know now, was right at the beginning of the shutdown. So there was no going back at that point. Just to kind of paint the picture a little bit further, and then I'll let Steve fill in. One of the key things I think we did early on was realize that we'd already built video calling into our app. And so we allowed clients to be called from their cars while we were doing, what we all came to call curbside, right? To be on a video call through the app with a veterinarian in the clinic. And to think about opening a new practice that nobody's ever been inside and asking people to hand over their cat's carrier and wait in the car, it gave us quite a leg up, I think, and really helped to kind of grow our legend around the West Hollywood area where the first practice was. So we were off to the races, especially with all the influx of pets into the system at that time.
Yeah, not bad timing to have a veterinary hospital opening when everybody else was fully booked and you had a blank page to work with.
Yeah, it wasn't long before we joined them in that fully booked arena, and that created a whole other set of problems that we had to solve too. So,
how many locations do you have now?
18. Number 19 opening on Monday.
So I'm in the elevator with Steve, I'm in the elevator with Christie, and you say, "I work with Modern Animal." And I say, "So what's Modern Animal and what makes you different from all of the other name brand organizations that are out there? So what's your special sauce?"
Christie, you want to go or you want me to go?
I'd love for you to take that elevator pitch question, Steve.
Well, I think more recently I'm describing it as we just really care a lot more than anybody else. I mean, if you think about what makes anybody great at anything that they do, I got to hear Novak Djokovic speak last week. I'm a lifelong tennis player. That was my sport. I left. There was a big takeaway other than that guy just tried really hard to be the best. And so I think in many ways that's all that's different, but that's everything. But everything else is going to sound like a list of features, and my point of view on that is they are features. They are ideas. They are things that we tested. Some of them have proven to be valuable. Some of them have proven to be a complete mess and have to be removed or have been eliminated or evolved. And that's part of just trying to build something better, right? So all the cliched quotes that we all know, that I won't repeat, but anything that you try to do and make better, make different, you're probably going to fail along the way. So there's inevitably ideas we've tried and have failed. But we are trying and we really care to get it right. And the thing that we care about getting right is being the absolute best place for a veterinarian or a veterinary technician to practice great medicine and to deliver a great experience for a pet owner. I think early on, we started very focused on the pet owner because to the discussion we were just having, we need clients to come in the door. But I think we've been very fortunate in this industry. And I think now people are speaking about, there being a sort of mini veterinary recession, but we really are just normalizing back to what was pre-COVID. This industry has always been very fortunate to not have a demand problem. I mean, people will always have pets. Their pets will always need care. And it just so happens that younger pet owners actually want more care than the pet owners before them. And the medicine's getting better. So I think overall, the ingredients are all right for demand to be strong. And then at the end of the day, we're in a marketplace and we have to figure out how to match supply and demand. But the problem is not on the client side as much as what I think when you look at Modern Animal, you might think that's what we're addressing. We built a beautiful clinic because we want our veterinarians and our technicians and our support staff to work in a beautiful practice for 10 hours a day. The client who's there for 30 minutes takes note of it, but that's not really who we're doing it for. And so forth, everything else, all the communication tools, that I was describing being broken or lacking, they ultimately facilitate better medicine and an easier day. And we have a long way to go still. And I think technology is currently really in 2024, finally in a place where we can really leverage it. Everybody can start to leverage it in a way that you really couldn't before. And that's going to dramatically change the experience of working as a veterinarian in the practice, I think. But that's ultimately what we're trying to do is just be the most customer centric with the veterinarian being our customer, the most veterinarian obsessed company on the planet.
I love that. The most customer centric, where your number one customer, and I'm going to suggest use the term client centric because to me, a customer is a tire kicker and a client is somebody you have a relationship with. So you client centric with your clients being your staff. I've been saying that for 25 years. Your number one client is your staff. You take care of them, they will take care of everybody else. So Christie, do you feel that Modern Animal is the quote unquote employer of choice in the veterinary profession these days?
I do. I wouldn't be here if I didn't believe that. I mean, I don't think we figured everything out, but I met with a group of vet students at Colorado State University last night and was telling them, I don't think there's anybody else that is more set up to figure out the things that we haven't yet solved. For me, some of the table stakes at the beginning were things like, how does your day run as a veterinarian? My day was, 20 appointments, an hour for lunch. They got filled with 5 drop-off pets. And then usually somebody who drug in at the end of the day because they called and said they really wanted to see Dr. Long, right? And I had no control over that. Sometimes I would get asked, but we all know that feeling of being the jerk who says, I got to leave, I can't stay. Nobody wanted to do that. So that was one of the first things we really set out to do was control the schedule and not just figure out how a doctor could have a dependable day of 16 patients in an hour and a half in the middle of the day and 30 minutes at the end to wrap up, but also still to take care of the same day needs because there's always same day needs, right? There's always dogs and cats that need to come in because they're sick on that day. And so that was a big part of the work we did early on. And as Steve iterated, I think urgent care is one of the things that we have had to iterate on several times. And I think we're finally close to getting it mostly right. But this idea that there has to be a doctor that has some flexibility in their schedule to accommodate the same day needs without completely wrecking their day, without just making it so they never get out of there. So I think that was a big one. I think paying doctors what they're worth and really making that a big focus. I think, supporting doctors too, in terms of continuity of care and whether you create a network across, practices in a similar area. We have a Pasadena clinic, a Studio City clinic, and a Glendale clinic. Our clients feel comfortable going to any of those or even anywhere across Los Angeles. So this concept that if I can't see Dr. Long, my world will fall apart. We've had to really work, and I think that our clients are for the most part very comfortable with that idea now. But all that goes back to helping our veterinarians create more boundaries, yet at the same time know that they're not compromising on the quality of care that their patients ultimately get.
Excellent. Now, you don't build this stuff by yourself unless you happen to be fortunate to have a good trust fund or rich parents, so it takes money. And so let's talk about money in the veterinary profession, because there's a lot of external money that's out there. And Steve, you heard me doing a podcast where the terms private equity and venture capital were bantered about, and they were belittled with a broad brush. And there's a difference. And there's a difference between how this money is used to make businesses successful. So I'm going to talk to the business geek from Bain and suggest that if you could help the listeners understand first of all, the difference between private equity and venture capital, and then with that, kind of where they fit into the profession.
Yeah, let's dive into that. And before we do, because you said, the way you phrase it is, how you can't create this all by yourself. We've been talking about in myself. I do want to say there was a lot of serendipity in how we started the company. And the biggest thing about creating anything, any startup, anything from scratch, is the people involved. And the serendipity for us was this small group of people that we call the founding team that all had this vision. At least the people from the veterinary industry, there was two other folks who had this vision that Christie and I also had shared. And it was one of those things where we'd run into them, or we met them, and it was an instant sort of, we're speaking the same language. And I just want to call those people out. One was Christine Schell, who was a technician early in her career, ended up building two of her own practices from scratch, large practices. And then those were acquired. So incredible expertise around, how do you actually build a clinic? How do you run a clinic? What are the challenges? And her vision was exactly the same. And then Avi Solomon, who I had heard about through some whispers that had been hacking away at similar things to what I had been talking about with Amazon Dash buttons and probably actual duct tape. And we heard, and then we were at a conference, and he was sitting across from me in a meeting with IDEX, because they had acquired SmartFlow, and he had just been hired to run SmartFlow. And he also shared the same vision. Also was a technician who had, actually was a computer engineer as well, software engineer who started as a janitor while he was in college at Dove Lewis and never left, became a technician, ended up running a bunch of their operations. And anyway, so that's the number one ingredient to doing anything, is who's around the table. And we just got very lucky that we had these people, all of us sharing a vision, who all took a big risk together. The other piece of it is, capital is required to do anything at scale. Now, I don't think capital is required to do anything in general. I think that, historically in this industry, you would go and get a loan from a bank, and they would support you. Put a little bit of money in, maybe, you have a friend or a family member, but we're not talking trust fund level, right? We're talking small amounts that you would be able to put in and build a practice. And then you would grow through your cash flow. You would get to profitability by practicing great medicine as a single doctor, and the support staff that you'd need. And it's very, very hard work, and you would be working all night and as a small business entrepreneur, and then you would be practicing medicine during the day. And that's obviously the story that you know well, and sort of the generation before of practice owners who built their practices. The challenge we have now is the word got out. The veterinary industry is a good business. And it got out slowly in the 90s and a little bit more in the 2000s. And really the 2010, and this is not precise dates, but 2010 through the pandemic era, things got really crazy. We had dozens of private equity firms buying up clinics, mimicking the strategies that VCA started and NVA started in the late 80s, early 90s. And things really came to a head because of the ZIRP era we were in. So zero interest rate policy that we had in this country allowed for very cheap debt, basically free money, and everything was going up and to the right in every industry for the most part. And so in that booming market, as the secret got out that the veterinary industry was a good business, along with a lot of other healthcare disciplines that were also being rolled up, consolidation started to really accelerate and snowball. And that required a lot of capital, and that attracted a lot of private equity capital, because you don't have to have a financially disciplined operator where you're very careful with the price you pay. You're very diligent about making sure all the numbers make sense going in. You don't screw up the numbers while you're running it, and then you sell it to somebody else. And the organic growth of the profession, the ability to keep buying clinics, allowed for people to make a lot of money doing that. And with COVID, it just accelerated, and it really came to a head. What I saw when we were building Modern Animal was an opportunity to build something different. But the pace at which this was all happening led me to believe that in order to actually have an imprint on this industry, you'd have to do it at scale. And the reality of my background is I came from an environment where I was never going to be that veterinarian sole practitioner in the practice, right? So I was always going to be a business person coming in. I just happened to really fall in love with this industry in this corner of the world that I was in. But it was always about having an impact at scale. And I'm always upfront about that. I think that there are incredible entrepreneurs who have impact and influence and inspire through smaller scale, but through impact that they have in a small way and then amplify it. Some of the people we know, I think, have done that incredibly well so far. And I'm excited to see them continue to do it at larger scale and with more volume and with more eyeballs following them, because that can inspire change as well. That's never been who I am. So our vision was always, let's do it at scale. That requires capital. So then the question became, well, who is the right capital to fund this? And my fear, and I've never really spoken about this, but one fear I had was that the only capital that would really be interested in a business like this, in a brick and mortar business that is a traditional business, is private equity. Other than like very high net worth, family offices, these are family offices for those that don't know of your listeners, it's a very different world. Or, there are families in the United States that have so much money that they have a professional team of people who manage just that family's capital. And they invest in all sorts of businesses, and they all come in all shapes and sizes. And, they might be doing good in the world. They might not be doing good in the world, but it's very hard to paint all these with a broad brush. Or a broad stroke. I think that the private equity sort of interest in the veterinary industry was very established by the time we started thinking about Modern Animal. And so that was where I assumed we would have to raise capital. And I was nervous about that, because what I had seen was that private equity was probably a very impatient partner, and that the work required would require a lot more patience. When I started Whistle, one investor told Ben and me, you want to make sure you pick an idea that you want to work on for 5+ years. And at the time, I had only been working for 5 years. So I thought, that sounds like eternity. That's a really high bar. And now I think about, am I going to run this for the next 30 years, for the rest of my career, right? And at the time, private equity, they will typically hold an investment at that time for 3, 4, 5 years. If it goes well, if it goes not as well, they may have to hold it for longer. And I'll never forget, there was a very senior executive from one of the Mars companies who left to start another company. And he said to me, I have a great capital partner. They have an average hold period of just under 4 years, very patient. And I was really shaken by that, because I thought, there's no way he's going to be able to build something really different. And he was very excited about how they were going to innovate and build a very different model, as a de novo practice model. And sure enough, a few years later, he's gone, and the company has really not achieved that vision whatsoever. I don't think I think they're trying. They're trying to do a good job, but the reality of the capital partner choice there was they were going to be impatient and they want to see returns quickly. They want to see profits quickly. They want to see rapid growth. The way it happened for us was a bit lucky, and I will always be upfront about that. One of my former colleagues was a partner at a fund called Founders Fund. We had worked together years before. He was someone that I confided in and trusted, and I wanted to get his advice. And we had dinner, and I told him about the vision for Modern Animal, what was going on in the industry. And this is a guy who was a former engineer at SpaceX. He was their first intern at SpaceX. He was an actual rocket scientist. And I thought, there's no way this guy's interested. I didn't meet him to talk about investing in Modern Animal, but we left that dinner and he said, I think we should invest in what you're building. I've known you for a long time. I believe in you as an entrepreneur. It sounds like an industry that needs real disruption and innovation. And I don't know that could happen again in 2024. And the reason is, at that point in time, capital was very interested in a lot of business, venture capital, that was traditionally investing in technology companies, was very interested in all sorts of companies, technology-enabled companies, whether that was technology-enabled real estate like WeWork, or technology-enabled services like Modern Animal or One Medical on the human healthcare side. And that was all a function of this zero interest rate environment we were in. People were looking to invest in things outside of what they had traditionally been investing in because they had raised so much capital. So I know I'm getting a little long on this one, but it's important to understand the dynamics in the marketplace at the time. And at the time, there was a lot of capital, abundant capital for consolidation. And it turned out that what I had found was there was abundant capital for the right person with the right idea from venture capital. And venture capital is different because it's very long-term focused. The idea of a venture firm is to invest for 10 plus years, to take something from an idea, early idea, all the way through to what we call an exit, which for Modern Animal absolutely is to be a long-term independent company, which probably looks like a public company. So we'll go have an IPO one day. But for, it might be an acquisition for others, but the goal is not to flip it in 3 or 4 years. The goal is to build something substantial, to really innovate, to drive disruption. And that takes time. Most times that takes a year or two to even get the product out. So that's how we started. There's a few others who have done that, pursued that path, but I think that door has shut. So we're left in a place now asking, okay, if that capital source is more or less unavailable to entrepreneurs in this profession, private equity still has a lot of interest in this industry. Where do we go?
So private equity are the home flippers, and venture capital are the ones who buy the apartment complexes and hang on to them.
That's actually a great analogy.
I pulled that out of the air, by the way.
They will probably sell it one day. That's
right.
Just the reality, but yeah.
Yeah, but you want to make sure that you fill all the apartments and that you have long-term leases before you go to sell it. So, Christie, you're a veterinarian, but you do have, this is kind of a second career, and you, like all of us in the profession, have had thoughts and ideas about these national corporations, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And, you've been involved with kind of a peripheral national corporation with Petco, but you also have been in private practice, and now you're in a unique, I'm going to still call you a startup, even though it's been fine. 5 years. What's your take? What's your take on external money in these national corporations? I mean, how does your gut feel when you start to see, hear, and read about all of this stuff?
I think probably, Peter, until I, got involved with this guy, I didn't know much. I didn't think much about where the capital came from. I certainly didn't when I worked for VCA, and I worked for VCA before Mars acquired them. We were talking to some vet students last week, Steve and I, from Davis, and we got to talking about consolidation and, private equity. And I just don't think most of us are even really aware, especially at that stage of the career, a lot of these topics. And I think there's a lot of veterinarians who are coming out of vet school now. I don't want to use the word disinterested in business, because I just gave a talk last night to some very interested veterinary students in business. But in general, you perhaps remember this feeling. You are so intent and so focused on getting the medicine and the surgery right and figuring out how to make people love you so that they keep coming back to see you, that I just, at least for me personally, I didn't think much about that. And so now to be where I am, and you know, I've met our board members. I don't think we could really be in a better position to have such patient advisors who are, you know, they're willing, they know that we're innovating, they know that it takes time, and they are willing to let us do that and handle the medicine piece of it and the surgery piece of it, because that's what we're good at, right? Or the technology piece of it, right? And wait for that return on investment. So, you know, for me, I'm grateful that there are investors like that who are interested in investing money in seeing someone solve the problems that I've seen, you know? I know too many friends who have worked for practices that have been consolidated and kind of found that, you know, giving feedback or talking about things that they feel could be better is not really the main focus of those companies, you know. Again, I'm doing what Steve did earlier and painting with a broad brush, and I'll stop doing that because I know they're not all alike. But it just, to me, it feels very gratifying to know that we have that support to really tackle some of these big issues in the way we think they should be dealt with.
Peter, one thing I would say is, you know, you have to earn the right to do things differently and get to keep doing them that way. And so I think for us to be long-term successful and having the veterinarian at the center of everything and not just having it be about profits, we have to demonstrate that that strategy works.
Yeah.
We're not a nonprofit, no veterinary clinic sort of that we're talking about, right? There are nonprofit veterinary clinics, but the ones we're talking about are not nonprofits. And if an individual sole proprietor, you know, my father was running his businesses, he could choose how much profit he cared about, right? But as soon as you sell the business to somebody, they've made an investment and they're seeking a return. And so I think that without, you know, saying anyone's good or bad, it's just the nature of business. And that's the unfortunate reality of veterinary medicine. But if you say to somebody, our strategy is, and this is what I say to our investors and our board, our strategy is to be the best employer for veterinarians possible. And that will create the differentiation to win in the marketplace. It's not because we just want to do good in the world, right? We might all care about it, all three of us here today, very deeply. But for people from the outside that you have to bring in, your initial prompt was, you know, you need help, right? You have to show them that the strategy makes sense, right? That the strategy of we're going to be the best employer, we're going to hire the best doctors, we're going to practice the best medicine, we're going to deliver the best experience, like your mission statement from your practice, right? We're going to practice high quality medicine, we're going to deliver great hospitality driven experience, and then clients are going to come to us and they're going to stay with us. It makes sense. And people are like, okay, that makes sense. Like, how do we do that? And I say, it's going to take a long time. We're going to build a lot of technology. We're going to build a lot of training and mentorship and leadership development. We're going to build different kinds of practices and see which ones make the most sense in terms of size, in terms of what they offer, in terms of different workflows. We're going to get a bunch of stuff wrong. It's going to probably take a year and a half to open the first one. It's going to take probably another year and a half after that, once we figure that out, to open another one. You know, we're going to be tiny 3 years in. So, but if you take a 10-year view, we might be a multi-billion-dollar company. And that's just a good pitch to an investor. Now, I think different investors now, you know, with interest rates higher and the market has corrected, are going to not believe that pitch, but will be interested in that pitch in like a business like the veterinary industry than maybe years ago. But I still think it's a good pitch. It's a good investment thesis. And that's not the thesis for most investors in our industry.
I just want to simplify the veterinary profession into a phrase, and you can correct me if you would like, but I think the veterinary profession puts purpose over profits. I think we focus on our passion, and the profit comes from the purpose that we have each day, every day that we go into the job. And I think sometimes when you have been consolidated or absorbed, that phrase gets reversed because of the need to answer to stockholders versus stakeholders. And so
Yeah,
that's where I think that's how I like to look at this.
I will also add, I don't think veterinary medicine is unique in that. I mean, I was talking to someone this morning who's in human healthcare, and he essentially said exactly the same thing about the experience he has had since the company that he helped to start was acquired. So, it's not a unique story.
So
Peter, I would just say before we move off of that last point you said, which I think really all of us hear that all the time in this profession. I think that the challenge I would make to all of us as an industry is, how do you paint a picture that purpose and profit actually go together here? Like, great medicine equals good business, and not say that one has to go in front of the other, because for an outsider investing in this, it's just too easy to then say, oh, that whatever you guys are doing isn't working, we got to flip it. Versus what we say is, no, it does work, and here's how it's going to work. But if we're not generating profit, that also doesn't work. And so it's not good enough to say, well, we're just really purpose driven, and so it's okay that we're not making money. And that's uncomfortable for this industry, right? I don't think it was uncomfortable for a sole practitioner who owned his own business to say, I need to lower my costs. I need to make sure we fill our schedule. I need to see some more appointments so that I can make some more money, because this is my business. This is my retirement. This is my savings. This is everything. This is my family's, source of income. And so it wasn't really talked about. And now when there's this outside owner and it's being imposed on us, I think that feels very different. But the opportunity is for people to show how, I'm going to practice more comprehensive medicine. It's going to drive higher revenue for the practice. It will drive profitability that way, versus an owner, whether a consolidator or some other outside owner, coming in and saying, we're losing too much money, demand has fallen a little bit, costs have gone up, we gotta, we've raised price more than we can raise, we can't keep raising it, we gotta cut labor, right? Like, to me, like, cutting staff is a sign of you've run out of ideas.
Well, the statistics indicate that about 50% of the US hospitals are truly nonprofit. They're not a 501c3, but they really they have not, they're not turning as much money as if somebody were to take the same money invested even in the stock market. So 50% of the hospitals are at 10, maybe 12% profitability. And many of those, and it goes back to some things that I've written, is they own a job, they don't own a business. And there's a difference between owning a job and owning a business. A business is going to give you a long-term return, and a job is going to pay the bills. Whereas I like to say, as an associate, you pay the bills, and as an owner in a well-managed business, you pay your kids' vet school tuition. Speaking from personal experience. So we have to think, and we have to help the next generation of veterinary students not just to focus on getting a job, but to own a business, and to take all the fear factors that owning a business comes with. And I think a lot of the young students are afraid of owning a business because of all of the responsibilities that go along with it. In my opinion, de novos and hospital purchases need to be the next focus for the independence of veterinary medicine. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but modern, for all intents and purposes, are de novos, and you're showing that model can work. I think there's plenty of money for it. I think the banks are willing to loan money for de novos, and they're also willing to loan money for buying practices that are cash flowed. And I think with the change in the current multipliers to being much more reasonable, the next golden age, in my opinion, are de novos or hospital purchases. Comments?
I think it's a great prompt. So on multiples coming down and the prospect of sort of a renaissance of smaller scale purchases by entrepreneurial veterinarians, I'm hopeful that is true, but my understanding is that multiples for single hospitals are still quite high. They got really out of control, and I think there are pockets probably where you could take one of these no or low profit practices and turn it around, and buy it for not that much. But if it's a well-run practice, it's probably still going to sell for, from what I understand, 8 to 12 times EBITDA. And the last time I ever spoke to a bank, a traditional bank that was lending to veterinary practices, it was something like 4 or 5x EBITDA that they would give you. So there's still a spread between what a lender will give you, but those numbers are probably not accurate because this is not the business we're in now. But I'm very excited about this as a potential future. I do think there's also the thing we have to address, which is the demographics have completely shifted in this profession. And I wish I saw, I mean, we are at Modern Animal, I don't know what, it's likely 80 to 90% women on the team. I'm amazed that our senior leadership team still lets me stick around because it's entirely women. And I think the reality of what I'm still seeing is most independent practices, de novo practices are getting started by solo veterinarian sort of practitioners are still mostly men. And I think that's going to have to change in order for us to see a real wave of new practices opening. And I think that's hard for all the reasons that, all of us know across industry is that's hard. So I think there needs to be more support for female entrepreneurship in the veterinary profession, and in general, more support for entrepreneurship. I think that's something that, we talked about this a little bit briefly before today. I do think there's an opportunity for, whether it's, companies like us or, people like you to inspire, to coach, to train people to, what does it actually take? It takes a lot of hard work and willpower, but it also requires knowledge. How do you actually run a business? How do you, hire, coach, mentor, train, develop people? The thing that is striking to me is the absolute dearth of great leaders in this industry. There are some, and they're incredible, but by and large, the industry has completely missed the mark on developing leaders from within. And then we have to bring in people from the outside, and they may not understand it, or the learning curve is too steep. And then it creates, everyone's favorite term of the toxic culture, toxic environment. And we have plenty of independent practices, not just consolidated practices or corporate practices where there's toxic culture. It's any run-of-the-mill practice that's still independent could still have a toxic culture, because it comes down to people. The same reason it comes down to the entrepreneur who's building something and how much they actually care. It comes down to who is the medical director, the chief of staff, or the clinic manager, the practice manager. How much do they care about their own self-growth and development as a leader, and the development of the people on their team? And without that, none of the stuff, no technology, no new practice, no new business model, no capital partner is going to determine or the success or failure of a practice.
So, Christie, why do we have a leadership problem?
It was never anything that I was even offered to learn. I was actually offered a leadership position when I was at BCA, and it's possible that this is different now, but the proposal was, that it would be like a knighting, ding, ding, your medical director now, without any real support on how I would know how to do the job, other than, and I do believe that at BCA and at other, hospital companies out there, they look at medical leadership differently than we do. The medical leader in the hospital is helping with the hard cases, kind of, maybe performance managing the doctors over medical decisions, or helping grow them in that way, scrubbing into surgeries when they need help. But we ask a lot more of our medical leaders. We actually run our hospitals in similarly to how a lot of human healthcare companies do it. We have what we call a dyad, a leadership dyad, which is where there's a medical leader and there's an operational leader. And it's really, it's a little simplistic to say they lead together, because you can't have two people who are constantly checking in with each other before any decisions are made. They obviously have things that they are primarily responsible for. But the idea is that you don't over-index on one over the other. And medical quality will always be the most important thing that we run our business on and strive for. But there's also, the employees. Are they engaged? They want to come to work. Are the clients happy and satisfied and enjoying the experience? And then finally, is the practice profitable to the level that we can grow the company, right? On an aggregate across the company. And so to really create a medical leader who's capable of delivering leadership in that kind of environment, I don't know who's prepared to do that, right? I mean, it's one thing to be charismatic. And as we know, doctors are often just the natural leaders in the practice regardless. But to have someone who understands all four of those commitments is something that we have to teach them how to do. And to answer your question about why that doesn't exist, I mean, it's not taught in any veterinary school that I'm aware of. Certainly, I know you are part of the curriculum at Western. There was a curriculum at CSU when I was there on practice management, but it's really just scratching the surface. And again, I think so many vet students are so worried about getting the rest of it right. It's just a really hard thing to think about focusing on. So most of them learn on the job, trial by fire,
Yeah. Yeah, you got Peter principled by VCA.
Is that named after you or?
No, I wish. Basically, we do it all the time. We move the receptionist to an office manager because she wants more money and a bigger title.
Yeah, with often disastrous results.
Absolutely. And I think, leaders are a little bit nature and a little bit nurture. And you have to have the right piece of clay to mold into a leader. I would debate, and probably piss off many of the veterinary schools by saying that the vet schools in many cases select against leaders because, bear with me, if you're a leader, you have to share your time in doing other things. But so many of us got into veterinary school strictly focused on academics and working in the field that we really never had the time to be a head of a club, maybe the pre-vet club, which is a whole bunch of potential leaders. But we really don't select for vet students who have had a lot of leadership experience. And in many cases, it's because it's much easier to teach followers than to collaborate with leaders. And so as an audience for faculty, you really want people who will absorb what you have to say and not question what you have to say. So those faculty at veterinary schools who are listening to this, think about who in your class are the leaders. Think about how difficult it may be to be getting leaders of clubs and organized veterinary medicine. I'm not sure that we are choosing leaders, which means we're not pumping out leaders because we're not giving them leadership opportunities in veterinary school. And then it becomes the responsibilities of an independent practice group, or somebody else, or for the mindset of that individual to actually go on to leadership training programs and other things like that. So I'm not sure we haven't done a disservice to the profession by adversely choosing people who really aren't going to be leaders.
Go ahead, Steve.
I think that our biggest learning, and this is probably surprising to people about Modern Animal, but our biggest learning is about people, not about all the other things that we do. And people always ping me and ask about our membership model or, our technology and the clinics design and all these things. But, the biggest learning is about people. And we've had a pretty bad hit rate on leaders. I'll say that transparently. I think it's 1 out of 3 leaders that we would put in that position were not successful. Either we hired them from the outside and they had the resume, and so we said, okay, well, they interviewed well and we should put them in as leaders. Or there's someone we really believed in and they raised their hand, or we sort of told them we needed them to step up, the way the industry does, and they weren't ready. And that was a disservice to them. So, and this requires a lot of hard work. It's not as objective as a lot of the academic work, and even as much as a lot of the medicine can be, or a lot of things in business. And so it's very hard to put your finger on exactly what that looks like. It's not just a leadership course or a development course. It's not, it requires great leaders to invest in mentoring future leaders. It requires patience. And when we think about, the de novo wave of new companies, and we think about all the consolidators, the de novos represented an opportunity to do this right, but it requires patience. And a lot of them have already sold to private equity again, so they're going down the same path. And those are the things that get gutted. They're the things that have the least obvious ROI or return on the investment that is required. And I don't know what the solution to that is, other than people just demanding better leadership, and I think you're spot on what, the veterinary school's role in all this as well. We need great leaders in this profession.
Yeah, I was going to say, I actually graduated with the first group of DVM MBAs from CSU. And it's that's a great idea in theory. Let's teach vet students business, but it's not the same as teaching them leadership, right? It's very different. And even if they had a management course in there, which I'm sure they did, it's not the same. It's hard to lead veterinarians. It's hard to talk to veterinarians about why they should care about the practice health, or why they should care about upskilling the nurses that they work with, or any of those things. Those are not always easy conversations to have, and nobody comes out of the gate well equipped for that.
What's interesting is I think a lot of the challenges the practices are facing around profitability, a lot of them would be actually resolved if they had better leaders. I mean, if you think about what is a veterinary practice? A veterinary practice is a schedule. Our COO always tells us, the schedule drives
the business.
And I think before she got here, Christie and I were not focused on the schedule, and Christine, Christie, me, all of us, we were not focused on the schedule. We knew it was important, but we're talking about the schedule is how many appointments you're seeing, how many of them are getting filled, the utilization of your team, right? And a lot of practices that are not profitable they're just not fully utilized. So is it a demand problem? Well, then do you have marketing capabilities? Is it actually that you have doctors who aren't skilled enough to be able to see all the appointments, and so you have to block a lot of their time off, and that actually requires a more experienced doctor to block their time, and so now you have a profitability problem because you have a doctor who's not skilled. So it ultimately comes down to this less sexy stuff of upskilling and training and developing skills as well on the job, as well as leaders. And if you have great leaders who understand how to do this and can hold people accountable, that's the other thing. One issue we faced is when we started the company, we just kept talking about how we're going to build a better place. We're going to build a better place for everybody. And we were vague about what that was. And the problem with that is it started to invite people who said, hey, I'm really burnt out. I'm not sure that I want to stay in the profession, but you guys are my last shot. And it turns out those don't make great employees. They don't make great leaders, obviously. And it's heartbreaking, but that's not the mission of Modern Animal. We're not here to fix the industry. We want to build a system that allows for us to show everybody what good looks like. What does it look like to hire great people? What do great people look like? What is the mindset? Someone who wants to grow and receive feedback. And a great leader has to be able to hold people accountable. Performance manage, give critical feedback. And that stuff is hard to do if you've never seen it done before.
It's hard to do when you want to be loved too. I mean, tough love.
Yes.
So yeah. We all have kids. We know what tough love is. I want to throw one more, what do you want to call it? Soundbite. When it comes down to veterinarians for the future, I think we should be matriculating veterinary students with higher EQ than IQ. Because I think we are a people profession. We are a service industry that delivers healthcare, not a healthcare industry trying to figure out how to deliver service, which means we need people who can communicate the healthcare side of things, not doctors who have no communication skills.
Can I say something maybe controversial?
Absolutely.
We haven't talked about technology yet. I think that technology is going to make a lot of doctors that are not amazing doctors better doctors. There's no technology that is going to help a bad communicator become a better communicator. And I think you're spot on. And it was one of the more surprising aspects of what I saw in the time in the industry before starting Modern Animal was the problems were people problems. The problems were communication problems. They were not, it's amazing how often we have clients who will tell, friends of mine who end up becoming clients of ours, and they'll tell me, oh, you guys just practice great medicine and so much better medicine. And I used to go to this other hospital and they were just terrible there. And then actually, I haven't even told you this, Christy. I can't remember which hospital it was, but we had 2 doctors from that hospital and they worked at this other hospital that this client went to. So they were probably seeing the same doctor. It's just they were working in a better environment. You know, I think that clients just misinterpret what good medicine is because they don't understand any of it, right? And so for them, what they see is communication, lack thereof. And it's hard when you've got, you know, retail customers, which is at the end of the day, veterinary clients or retail customers are terrible today, especially after COVID. I mean, they've gotten so entitled. Everything is, you know, transparent in their eyes. They can complain in a second and take down your business. It's a really difficult environment to be in. And I always tell our team, like, I care about our reviews, not because of my own ego, but because of your ego. I don't want your name getting smeared on Yelp and it's never going to get taken off and it's unfair and it's not accurate.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, why do they complain? It's because of miscommunication. I mean, all of the issues we see in the industry between clients and doctors are miscommunication, not quality of medicine for them.
Absolutely. So there are 3 things. Somebody asked me from one of the consolidators I was at dinner with. They said, so what's the biggest problem in veterinary medicine? I said, lack of leadership. The other 2 are bad communication and a failure to train. And so if we can solve all of those things and we can keep our staff, we can keep our clients. And if we can keep our doctors, we can keep our staff and we can keep our clients. We don't need more clients. We just need to take care of the ones that we have and keep them coming back. And we don't need more staff. We just need to keep the ones that we have so we don't have to constantly be replacing them. Any veterinary hospital who puts in a revolving door at their front door is making a lot of mistakes because their staff will be using it.
Oh, such an interesting conversation. I would also submit that the whole medical quality thing, see what you just brought up about, you know, your friends saying how great our medicine was, and they just were so impressed over their last practice. People see what our team does, and they've probably never had that experience before because we have an open hospital concept. We invite people to come into the treatment room. And I don't think we have a huge medical quality problem in the industry at all. I think doctors are being trained well. They know what good medicine looks like. They know how to offer good medicine, but nobody sees it. And the power that exists when a client sees one of our team members get blood from a cat by using a tube of Churu in one hand, you know, that's remarkable. And it's impressive, and clients don't forget it. And maybe that's where a lot of the perception of better medicine comes from, right? But then also the fact that they're told what the lab results say, and they get a complete, breakdown from the doctor of the next steps. And we really try to bring people, into the fold and make sure they understand what our doctors feel like are the next best steps for the patient. So.
Well, and it takes hiring, and it takes training, and it takes a lot of different foci that we don't always put front and center. And in 2024, front and center has become technology over touchology in some cases. And I'm a big advocate of the fact that we need technology, but we can't sacrifice the touchology component of it as well. So let's go to technology, because a lot of what you built at Modern is tech driven. And obviously, Steve, you come from a tech background. So if you were to pick out some tools, and either of you can answer this, but if you were to pick out some tools that Modern leans on from a technology standpoint, what are the tools that sit front and center in what you do each day, every day, all the time from a technology standpoint for Modern?
So the original reason to have brought technology into the practice was communication. So how do you bridge that gap between the client and the practitioner? So that allowed us to, that means everything from booking appointments to actually chatting with, whether it's text, phone, video, the ability to actually connect with somebody and ask a question. And, if you have a concern, confirm, do I need to come in or do I not need to come in? So what we call teletriage, right, in the industry. But also just basic customer support questions about your bill, all of that. So communication was important. And we had to build a lot of technology to facilitate that, because at the time, you really couldn't plug things in that easily into PIM systems. A lot of these are sitting on a server. They're what we call on-prem software. So on-premise software sits on a server in the back of a practice. We've been trying to get out of that for many years as an industry, but unfortunately, every cloud-based PIMS kept getting acquired by some other company and then getting shelved. So we don't really have a healthy software ecosystem. And what a healthy software ecosystem looks like in other industries is you have a bunch of software companies. By this day and age, they're all cloud-based. And so they're really lightweight implementations, meaning you can go on a website, you can create an account, you can start to use it. And those systems often have what were called APIs or open APIs. So it's really easy to now develop. So APIs are these interfaces between basically allowing two different platforms to communicate with each other and share data. And that doesn't really exist very well in this industry. I don't want to say it doesn't exist at all now, but it really did not exist at all when we were starting. And it is getting better, but it is still not great in this industry. And what that prevents is if someone has the best-in-class telemedicine product, or someone has a great mobile app or scheduling platform, being able to plug that into your existing practice management system makes the whole change management that's required much simpler. I had a conversation with one of the largest consolidators, and they asked for some advice on how to implement new technology into the practice. And they described how they tried to implement in one of their practices, a cloud-based practice management system. And they said, we're leaving clients behind. We need something that has more features. These things seem to exist now. Third-party tools seem to exist in the industry that allow for this. But when we rolled it out to our one practice that was testing it, there was a revolt. And of course there was, because they're not good at change management. They basically have said, join us, stay you. That was one of their mottos back in the day, the one that you know well. And that was a euphemism for we're not going to do anything. So now we want to come in and change your software, which is the brain for everything that you're using. And people on the team there are probably absolutely not, get out of my way. So we had to build our own. So we built our own practice management system, what we call Claude, which is our electronic medical record system. But Claude is really the brains that allow us to do a bunch of other things. It's not the actual soap that is the most important thing to innovate around. It's the data that then feeds, whether that or comes into that, whether that's the diagnostic results, whether that's communication with the client, whether that's the appointment booking. I think whether that's the prescriptions. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that feed into the system. If you're a practitioner and you have your own practice and sort of what technology you need today, I mean, I think everybody has to have an electronic medical record system, but it has to be cloud-based today, because if you want to bet on future people building, future other entrepreneurs who are building things today and in the future that you can leverage, you need a system that allows for these connection points. So that's really important. The thing about technology that's really interesting now that I'd love to talk about for a few minutes is AI. So obviously artificial intelligence is getting a lot of news everywhere in the world. It's the most exciting thing in technology in a long time. And I think what's really interesting that we've seen is that AI for healthcare, so veterinary care as a subset of that, is actually incredibly relevant. I would even argue potentially the most relevant application of AI that we've seen so far in this very early stage of it. And that's because medicine relies on a lot of data, has access to a lot of data, and AI does a really good job of detecting patterns with data. And then translating it into human language that we can share with clients that is mimicking what our doctors would do. And we still need our doctors to look at it and to check it and correct it. But man, does it make things faster. And if we can eradicate hours a day of a doctor's time spent on a computer writing medical records, that's just more time to see patients. It's more time to actually focus on communicating with clients. So I don't know that I'd die on the hill over any piece of specific technology other than just you want to be in a position to be able to take advantage of these things. I certainly don't recommend building all of your own stuff. I mean, that's a luxury and a burden that we uniquely have. But I do think that now in 2024, there are good tools out there that allow you to start leveraging these things. What you don't want to end up with, though, is just a big soup of, a dozen different systems. That's just too difficult to manage for your team.
Yeah, I mean, if I could just add to that, I think, we made the decision to write our own practice management system about 6 months after we opened the first practice, because we just knew we couldn't move fast enough without it. And I don't know, Steve, maybe this is my personal confession. I think I've gone back and forth, and maybe you have too, a couple of times as to whether that was the right call. But in this day of AI, there's no question it's the right call. I mean, we couldn't be sitting around waiting for, Covetrus or whoever it is to put in AI into the practice management system so that we could then give that to our team so they could save valuable time during the day. It is just absolutely owning our own technology stack has allowed us to really take advantage of this. So it's a really exciting time.
So I would suggest one thing that I feel that most of the PIMS has been negligent, and that's the CRM component, the client relationship management component of the PIMS. Because if we're going to be a service industry, we need to know everything that we can, and we need to capture everything we can about clients, and we need to fill in those data gaps, such as how did you find out about us? Where does your dog sleep? And which exam room is your preferred exam room, and who's your preferred technician, so that we can continue to give clients that experience that will be a differentiator. I mean, the practice management softwares have been an electronic cash register, a very poor inventory management tool, and something that pumps out data with garbage in and garbage out. And so we're a long way from solving that problem. Oh, and by the way, if we can figure out how to cut 3 hours out of the day, Christie, you were not going home at 8 o'clock at night because you were seeing emergencies. It was because you were spending 2 to 3 hours a day writing up your medical records.
Yep.
And
It
whether
was
it's
me and Cornerstone. Yep.
and whether it's artificial intelligence or any other form that allows us to expedite the medical record keeping in human healthcare, they can carve 2 hours to 3 hours a day out just by using either a live or digital scribe. We don't stay late for cases. We stay late trying to remember what we saw at 8 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, totally.
Well, that goes back to staff utilization as well, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, how can you train your staff to really help you get in a place where your medical record is almost completed for you? So that's a big piece of it as well for us.
Yeah, and I would suggest, and I'm writing an article on this as well, that a lot of the issues that we have are trust issues. And a lot of the issues we have in trust becomes from not training.
Exactly. Yeah. Why don't you trust them?
Right. So we've got this vicious cycle. And so I appreciate everything you have told me about the modern culture of its people, of its focus on becoming an employer of a choice within the veterinary profession, and recognizing the challenges associated therewith, especially as you continue to scale. Because the more hospital locations you have, the more challenging it becomes. Even if you've got all the systems in place, you still need the right people. And so between that, go ahead, Steve.
I would say that the systems have to keep adapting as well. I mean, I think that's one of the benefits of building your own system, but then obviously one of the challenges of it is we are responsible for maintaining it and upgrading it. The benefit is we can do that at a faster pace, but things continue changing. Whether that's because the team grows and we have to change something in our model, or that's because the technology that's available is different, or even the expectations of the team or the expectations of the client. But I agree with you on the CRM piece. I think that the question that then begs is who is doing the CRM, actual management, and so that's a problem and a question for a lot of smaller practices is, who's actually going to be communicating and what are the expectations? But I think in general, communication and trust is the single biggest gap between clients and veterinarians. And so technology is actually very good at that, being, technology to create more transparency, to create more communication, more frequent touch points, more engagement, more dialogue. I think all these things are allowing us to put the veterinarian back at the center of care. And I think that's a good move for veterinary practices to invest in that, because it'll allow them to build stronger relationships with clients in an era when that has been really put to the test with the internet and all of this sort of, the corporate consolidation and sort of the lack of engagement from the teams themselves and the practices, which then make people think they're getting bad medicine and at the very least bad experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we've covered a lot of ground in the last hour and 15 minutes or so. I want to see if you're up for the alternative universe conversation that we kind of had offline before we started, which is, here we are in 2024. Where do you think veterinary medicine would be if we hadn't dealt with the pandemic, if we hadn't had that couple of years of disruption? Now, in your case, maybe it was to your benefit because of the timing of opening your first hospital. You got to kind of work through a lot of the challenges at that time. But where do you think veterinary medicine would be in 2024 if we had just kept in the rut or the norm that we were in 2019, 2020?
Yeah, I think there's a number of things that were happening. It's important, I think, to recall where we were, in the first few months of 2020. And I think we already were talking about a shortage of veterinarians. We certainly weren't talking about a surplus, but I do remember when I first got into the pet industry, unless I'm hallucinating, I remember a conference where I was at where there was a debate where there were people making the argument that there was going to be a surplus of veterinarians. So I think that it has probably been, and you can correct me, but it's probably been a topic that we have been seesawing on for many years in this industry, because it is hard to know, do we have excess supply or are we undersupplied? But certainly if we had not had the pandemic, I think we would have seen fewer, the rush of pet owners coming into the market. It would have been more, I think we still will see higher pet ownership, just with the younger audience that we now have. But I think it increased by 10%. It went from like 66, 67% of millennials, I think, had pets before COVID. And then by the end of it, a couple of years later, I think it was over 75, 76%. So I don't think that would have happened in such a short period of time. Would it have happened over a longer period of time? Maybe, but we would not be at the same level of ownership. I think that's probably realistic. Young people with pets, it's hard traveling. You're not settled down yet. But when you're in COVID lockdown, you felt a lot more settled down and a lot more willing to get a pet. I think that the consequence of that is that veterinarians would be making less money today. So, if I talk about the positives, putting aside modern animal, I think veterinarians finally had pricing power, meaning they could demand higher salaries. They were earning more. I think that was a very big positive as the debt loads have increased to finally have veterinarians start to make more money. I think it attracted a lot of capital. And that capital, in our case, was very good for us. And I think we're doing, good in the world. We're not perfect, but we're trying. I think it attracted capital that was probably capital we did not need in this industry, that has done less good, and invited some tourists, we might say. But all of that, I think, created an environment where we now have more attention. There's a finer sort of, there's a more powerful microscope on sort of the problems in this industry. And if it hadn't been for COVID and we hadn't had this extreme shortage and there wasn't all the news about it, and all this capital hadn't come in and made it worse, just to be frank, I think we might still be a really good business that doesn't really have any motivation to be solving the problems. And so my hope is that this is creating a moment where there are loud voices saying we can do better, and whether that's independent practitioners building their own practices, some of whom we know who I think are doing a phenomenal job of really showing that you can, at small scale, build something really different and inspire people to think differently, or putting pressure on the bigger corporations and say, hey, that's my goal ultimately, is to say, hey guys, you can actually build a great business being a great employer, but what you're doing is not working, and that's why you have hundreds of vacancies and why you're seeing declining profits in your practice. And at the end of the day, the market should tell us all the answer. And I think the answer is going to be, you have to prioritize the practitioner. So it probably wouldn't have happened as fast if it wasn't for COVID, is my take.
So that's the economics 101 discussion. Now the boots on the ground, getting scratched, kicked, and anal gland. What's your thoughts?
Oh, I'm just sitting here, Peter, wondering how many people we lost in the profession, because of COVID. I mean, and whether that's, I'm done with veterinary medicine forever, I'm going to sell real estate, or whether that's, I want to go work for Hills, I want to get out of clinical practice. I mean, I still talk to veterinarians now who really tell me, that their number one goal is to get out of clinical practice. And I don't know how much of I have to believe COVID had a role in that. Now, maybe if our house had been in order more when COVID happened, in terms of a lot of the things and the themes we've been talking about this afternoon, that wouldn't have been the case. But it was essentially the pressure valve. We're already we already have a lot of broken aspects of what we're doing. And now we put in a huge influx of patients. I mean, it's what happened in human healthcare too, right? And more applicably to the actual disease that was causing it, right? For us, it was just a different impetus. So that's what always strikes me. And I always think, we used to joke when we had a particularly difficult client experience, wouldn't it be great if they just came in with their own little wallets in their back pockets without any people? And then, we actually got that, and it wasn't great. So, if COVID had not happened, I have to believe that we probably would have still had a lot of folks in the profession who've moved on.
So Steve, when you build your next company, what I'd like you to do is build a microchip with a credit card embedded in it. So we just have to scan the dog and it automatically would approve the credit card. So we don't even have to see the client.
No way, Peter. I'm ahead of it. I'm ahead of you on this. Steve is going to bankroll my exam glove with a thermometer embedded in the index finger idea. That's where Steve's going to go next. You do a rectal exam and get a temperature at the same time. Yeah, no, Steve's not going anywhere. I'm not letting him. So
yeah, I'm sure not banking the half-brained ideas that you have. So
it just as a capper, it was very cool to see Mark Cuban funding Mela, and their third choice for thermometer. We used to only have 2 holes. Now we have an armpit. So it's all good. And I really challenge the 2 of you and your company to continue to make people uncomfortable, to continue to drag the profession kicking and screaming into the 20th century. We'll work on the 21st after we get to the 20th. And to continue to be a leader in taking care of your people so they can take care of your clients, so they're willing to take care of their pets, which is all to the good of the profession. So I want to thank you for your time today. I don't know about the 2 of you, but my brain is stuffed. Lots of good stuff, lots of great conversation. So thank you both.
Thank you, Peter.
So much, Peter.
Inviting the conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Thank you, Christie, for joining us today and talking to us about modern animal and your unique approach, as well as a variety of other peripheral stuff in the veterinary profession. I appreciate it very much. The listeners will appreciate it. Thank you to our listeners. We appreciate each and every one of you. We can't do what we do without you. If you like our podcast, share it with your colleagues and friends on social media. If you want to, feedback on any of the things we talked about, I think we could continue to have this conversation for hours. And I think this is part of what we as a profession need to do. This is all about communication. This conversation that you just listened to started because Steve listened to a podcast that I did previously. And that's how we learn, by sharing and having these courageous conversations, which is another one of my podcasts, by the way. So don't forget to leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Your reviews help other doctors and students and practice owners find us. Until next time, keep striving for excellence and keep making a positive impact on the lives of your patients, of your pet parents. Everybody have a great week ahead. Thanks so much.